The woman at the front desk didn't even look up when Claudette Harmon walked through the door. That was the first thing. Not a hostile glance, not a suspicious stare. Just nothing. The kind of nothing that tells you everything. Claudette stood there for a moment, her leather portfolio tucked under one arm, her coat still damp from the November rain outside. The lobby of the Alderton was everything the brochures promised. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, brass fixtures that caught the chandelier light, just so, the faint scent of gardenias drifting from an arrangement near the concierge desk that probably cost more than most people's car payments. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you were supposed to ask permission just to breathe the air. She had been here before, twice, but always through the service entrance, always carrying something, always invisible, in the way that certain people are trained to make certain other people invisible. Today was different. Today, Claudette walked to the front desk and set her portfolio down on the marble counter. The woman behind the desk, her nameplate read Stephanie, finally looked up, and the look on her face was not one of welcome. It was the look of someone doing a rapid, silent calculation, taking inventory. The wool coat, yes, but it was a dark charcoal, not the kind of label you could spot from across a lobby. The handbag, understated, no jewelry except small gold earrings. Natural hair pulled back simply. A woman who did not announce herself. Stephanie's smile arrived approximately one beat too late. "Can I help you?" she said. The words were correct. The tone was a door held open just barely wide enough to suggest you might want to reconsider walking through it. "I have an appointment," Claudette said. 11 o'clock, the Whitmore suite. Something shifted behind Stephanie's eyes. "I'm sorry, the Whitmore suite is reserved for private events. Are you perhaps looking for the restaurant? It's just around the—" "I know where the restaurant is," Claudette said. She said it quietly. She had spent 43 years learning how to say things quietly. "I have an appointment. 11 o'clock. The name is Harmon." Stephanie's fingers moved to her keyboard with the energy of someone performing thoroughness rather than actually doing it. A few clicks. A pause that lasted about 3 seconds longer than it needed to. "I'm not seeing anything under that name," she said. "Are you sure you have the right hotel?" Claudette looked at her. "The Alderton Grand, corner of Whitfield and Mercy. The Whitmore suite, 11th floor. Yes, well." Stephanie's smile tightened. "I'm afraid I don't have any record of." "Stephanie." A man's voice, from somewhere behind the desk. A colleague, maybe 30 years old, leaning over to look at the screen. His name tag read Daniel. He glanced at the screen, then at Claudette, then at Stephanie, and something moved across his face that he quickly tried to put away. Can I see the screen for a second?" "I've got it," Stephanie said. "No, I just—" He leaned closer, looked at something, went very still. Claudette waited. She was good at waiting. She had raised 3 children mostly alone after her husband Raymond died in 2009, worked double shifts at the hospital for 6 years, gone back to school at 41. Built something from nothing with her own hands and her own mind, and a stubbornness that her mother always called a character flaw, and her children now called a gift. She knew how to wait. "Mrs. Harmon," Daniel said carefully, "I do apologize for the confusion. You're absolutely in our system. Your party is already upstairs." He looked at Stephanie with an expression that was professionally blank, in a way that was itself a kind of communication. "I'll arrange for an escort immediately." Stephanie had stopped smiling. "That won't be necessary," Claudette said. She picked up her portfolio. "I know the way." What Stephanie didn't know, what almost no one in that lobby knew, was that Claudette Harmon had been to the Alderton Grand 11th floor before. She had been there 14 months ago, not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as the woman who had spent 7 weeks poring over the acquisition documents that would eventually make the Alderton Grand one of 6 properties absorbed into a real estate portfolio that she had spent the better part of a decade quietly assembling. Harmon Capital Holdings was not a name that made headlines. That was deliberate. Claudette had learned early that there were 2 kinds of wealth in this country. The kind that announced itself, and the kind that worked. She had always preferred to work. The Alderton Group had been struggling for 2 years before her team approached them. A series of bad renovation contracts, an executive who had made some creative decisions with the renovation budget, a couple of quarters where the numbers simply did not add up. The board was tired. The investors were restless. When Harmon Capital came to the table, they had come quietly, and they had come with a number that the board could not reasonably refuse. The deal had closed 8 weeks ago. Most of the Alderton staff didn't know. The management transition was still ongoing. A deliberate choice, because Claudette had found over the years that sudden changes in ownership tended to create chaos, and chaos was bad for business. The plan had always been to allow things to settle, conduct a quiet internal review, and introduce changes gradually. She had not planned to accelerate that timeline today. But then Stephanie had looked at her the way Stephanie had looked at her. And now here she was, stepping into the elevator with her portfolio and her damp coat, pressing 11, and feeling the very specific kind of calm that came not from the absence of anger, but from knowing exactly what to do with it. The Whitmore suite was in fact reserved for her. The meeting she had called was with the hotel's regional operations director, a man named Gerald Whitfield, who stood when she walked in, and whose handshake was firm, and whose face was professional, and who had no idea, looking at her, that she was the reason he had a job. Also in the room, a woman named Patricia Sue from the legal team, and a younger man Claudette had brought with her. Her operations director, a sharp-eyed 35-year-old named Deshaun Cole, who had been with her company for 6 years, and who now set a folder on the conference table and opened his laptop without being asked. "Mrs. Harmon," Gerald smiled. "Good to finally put a face to. Before we start," Claudette said, sitting down, "I'd like to pull up the security footage from the lobby approximately 10:55 to 11:05 this morning." Gerald blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The lobby footage. Do you have access to that from up here, or do we need someone from security?" There was a pause. Gerald looked at Patricia, who was already looking at Claudette. Deshaun was typing. "We can pull it," Gerald said slowly. "Is everything all right? Did something happen downstairs?" "I'd like to see it first," Claudette said. "Then we can talk." The footage was not flattering. They watched it together on the conference room screen. Claudette walking in. Claudette setting her portfolio on the counter. Stephanie's face cycling through its calculations. The long pause. The smile that came too late. The moment when Stephanie told her she had the wrong hotel. The moment when Daniel leaned over and looked at the screen and went still. Nobody in the conference room said anything for a long time. "Mrs. Harmon," Gerald finally said. "I want to. I am deeply." "The employee's name is Stephanie," Claudette said. "I'd like her full personnel file. And I'd like to know if there have been other complaints, formal or informal." Gerald looked at Patricia. Patricia was already writing something down. "There have been 2 informal complaints in the last 8 months," Patricia said, without looking up. "Both from guests. Neither was escalated. Why not?" A silence. "That," Patricia said carefully, "is a question we should be able to answer." Claudette nodded. "Yes, it is." She opened her portfolio. Inside was a set of documents that she slid across the table. The acquisition agreement, the board resolution, the signature page with her name on it. She did not do this dramatically. She did not make a speech. She simply placed them where they could be seen and let them do what documents did. Gerald picked up the first page. "Read the first paragraph." "Set it down." He looked at Claudette Harmon, really looked at her, for what was perhaps the first time since she had walked into the room. "The transition team should have briefed all department heads," he said. "It came out a little hollow." "They should have," Claudette agreed. "We'll be revisiting that process." She folded her hands on the table. "I want to be clear about something. This is not about one employee having a bad morning. What I saw downstairs is a symptom. And in my experience, symptoms don't go away on their own." She paused. "That's why we're here." What happened next took about 40 minutes. Gerald made 3 phone calls. Patricia drafted a memo that would go to every department head in the building before the end of the business day. A member of the HR team came up to the 11th floor. A woman named Helen, who listened carefully and took meticulous notes, and whose expression, as Claudette described the morning, moved through several stages before settling into something that looked like grim resolve. At some point during those 40 minutes, word began to travel, the way words travel in hotels, through service corridors and staff break rooms, and the particular kind of whisper network that exists in any place where people work closely together and share information in the margins of their jobs. Claudette was aware of this. She had watched it happen before. The moment when a building's social ecosystem suddenly rearranges itself around new information. At 11:47, Helen left the conference room. She took the elevator down to the lobby. Stephanie was at the front desk, rearranging a small display of local guidebooks, when Helen arrived. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Stephanie did not raise her voice. Neither did Helen. There was no scene, no drama, nothing that would have disturbed the guests, moving through the marble lobby, with their luggage carts, and their coffee cups, and their perfectly ordinary mornings. But when it was over, Stephanie went to the back office and collected her things from her locker. She did not return to the front desk. One of her colleagues, a young man named Travis, who had been watching all of this from the concierge station, walked her out through the side entrance. He did not say much, neither did she. Daniel, who had been the one to look at the screen and go still, and try to do the right thing in a small, quiet way, was asked to step in at the front desk for the rest of the shift. He did so without comment. Claudette's meeting ran until 1:30 in the afternoon. By the time it was done, she and Gerald and Patricia and Deshawn had gone through a 60-page operational review, identified 4 systemic issues beyond the morning's incident, and outlined a staff training initiative that would begin the following month. Gerald was, by the end of it, a man who understood the situation he was in, and who seemed, genuinely, not just professionally, willing to do the work required to fix it. Claudette had dealt with enough people to know the difference. She packed up her portfolio. Deshawn closed his laptop. Patricia sorted her notes into a folder. "I'll have the follow-up summary to your team by end of week," Gerald said. "Thursday," Claudette said, "not end of week." Thursday, he agreed. She shook his hand. Then Patricia's. She was almost at the door when Gerald spoke again. "Mrs. Harmon." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About this morning. You should have been welcomed. It should have been different." Claudette looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, "it should have." She walked out. The elevator doors opened without being called, as if the building itself had finally decided to cooperate. In the lobby, on her way out, she passed the front desk. Daniel was there. He was checking in a family with 3 children and a mountain of luggage, and he was doing it with the kind of patience and warmth that Claudette knew from Patricia's notes. He had been doing consistently for 4 years without a single formal complaint. He didn't see her pass. He was focused on the family, crouching slightly to talk to the youngest child, who had apparently lost a stuffed rabbit somewhere between the parking garage and the lobby, and was deeply upset about it. Claudette stopped. She watched him for a moment. The way he spoke to the child, the way he signaled to a colleague to check the lost and found without making a production of it, the way the child's face changed when the rabbit appeared from behind the concierge desk, ears slightly crumpled, entirely intact. She made a note in her phone. Daniel Okafor, front desk. 4 years. There were things that needed to change at the Alderton Grand, and she was going to change them. But there were also things that were exactly right, and those, she had learned, you protected. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city was doing what cities do after rain. Everything slightly cleaner than it had been. The sidewalks reflecting the pale November light. People moving faster, now that they didn't have to navigate umbrellas. Claudette stood on the corner of Whitfield and Mercy, and waited for Deshawn to bring the car around. She thought about Stephanie, not with satisfaction. She had never found satisfaction in someone losing their livelihood, even when that someone had earned it. But she thought about the moment at the counter, that rapid silent calculation, the smile that came a beat too late. The way certain people move through the world, deciding, in an instant, who deserved their attention and who didn't. Deciding based on things that had nothing to do with the person standing in front of them. She thought about all the people who came through lobbies like that one, and received exactly what she had received this morning, and had no recourse, no portfolio, no acquisition documents, no conference room on the 11th floor. She thought about that a lot, actually. It was, in some ways, the thing that had made her the person she was. Not anger, exactly. Something more deliberate than anger, something that had taken 43 years to build into something useful. The car pulled up. Deshawn leaned over and pushed the passenger door open from inside. "How'd it go?" he asked. Claudette got in, set her portfolio on the back seat, pulled her seatbelt across. "Thursday," she said. "We'll know." Deshawn nodded and pulled into traffic, and the Alderton Grand grew smaller in the side mirror, its brass fixtures still catching the light, its marble still gleaming. Its lobby still full of people arriving and departing, and being seen or not seen, depending on calculations made in fractions of seconds by people who had never stopped to examine where those calculations came from. That, Claudette thought, was about to change. Not because she was angry. Not because she wanted revenge, or a scene, or a story to tell at dinner parties. But because she owned the building, and she had work to do, and she had never in 43 years let anything stay broken when she had the tools to fix it. She opened her portfolio and got back to work before they reached the end of the block.